Hey everyone, welcome back to I think our 29th online beer tasting tonight. So naturally, of course, when I wanted to talk about beer tasting with some sours in it, it was -10. But as soon as I want to do nothing but dark beers, we had a high of +17 today. So yes, everything's going exactly to plan. I want to specifically thank Aaron for getting our audio issues sorted out. We had some battles to fight with that, but we got through all of it and we are right back at it. So let's talk about our 4 Americanized dark beer styles. Now all of these, except for Black IPA, do have a little bit of a commonality with some beers in the old world. Now of course, Porter and Stout, these are British styles. Porter hails back to the 17th century and Stout comes in from the 18th century, 18th and 19th centuries, and then we have Black Lager, which is older than all of these. This is actually a 12th century style coming out of Brunswick. The Germans call it Schwarzbier. Now Schwarzbier, of course, is very, very old. It tends to have a really, really strong smoke component. The Americans tend to, and you're going to hear this a lot with this tasting, dial down the smoke, dial down the roast, bring up the sugar, bring up the alcohol. And that's rather what happens with American dark lagers. So we have an all Alberta, actually all Calgary lineup tonight, which is really fun. This might be our first last best beer on the show. I don't think it is, but might be. I feel there's something right in the back of my brain saying we've done one last best seasonal before. So if you remember which one it is, I don't. Do please let me know. But for tonight, we're going to start with the last best Dirty Bird Black Lager. Now, for those of you joining us for the first time, lagers are different from ales. Most of your beer styles, IPAs, the A stands for ale, your IPAs, most of your wheat beers, all of your Belgian stuff, 99% of the beers that you see on a craft beer selection or craft beer menu are going to be ales. Lagers tend to be smoother, softer, have less yeasty character, and they tend to be a little more easy drinking because they don't have any of that yeasty spiciness. Now, is that to say we're going to get a lot of yeast character out of the Annex or the Establishment or the Dandy here? No, I think that's very unlikely, but they'll have a little bit more than this lager does. So let's dig right into the Dirty Bird Dark Lager, and let's talk about the history of German Schwarzbier as well as the American Black Lager. Oh, that's nice. I like how sweet and kind of chocolatey that is. And yes, thank you. Someone has immediately made a Goose Loonies joke. I really appreciate that. That's the joke that has a certain age range attached to it. But yes, I made the same joke when it showed up. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about traditional German Schwarzbier or Black Lager. These go back to the 12th century. Of course, back that far, we don't have things like hot kiln roasting. We don't have things like unsmoked malt. We don't really have isolated yeast strains. We're still using wild ferments. So out of that, specifically out of the area of Brunswick, we have what ends up being called Brunswick Mum, which is this roasty, chocolatey, lightly smoky style that uses a proportion of roasted barley in addition to just standard brown malt to create these lager dark roasty beers that became kind of the signature style for dark lagers out of Germany. Now this style evolved and changed over time, obviously, as brewing technology increased. One of the things that stayed with it is even after we developed kind of dry kilning so that not all beer had to be smoky, they still added a little bit of that smoked or roasted malt to keep that smoky note in it. Being traditional German lagers in this style, the hop note, if it was present at all, would be very muted, and that carries through into these American style dark lagers. It also has this really nice chocolatey note that I really appreciate. Yeah, it kind of has like root beer and milk chocolate together with just a touch of coffee. Now, here in Alberta, of course, we obviously have the Dirty Bird Black Lager here, but let's go back a little tiny ways. If anybody here is, I don't know, you'd have to be at least 35, but there was a craft brewery in Calgary that was out, I think even before Wild Rose came along. It was just kind of them and Big Rock. It was called Brews Brothers, or maybe Brew Brothers. And they sold them in these 500 ml swing tops, almost like Grolsch bottles. They came in these really flimsy cardboard 4-packs. They had a really neat like red ale, but the one that we sold off the shelf the strongest on the very rare occasions we could get it, and then what they certainly sold the most of, was what they called a black Pilsner. And it was very much in this style. It was maybe a touch hoppier, but Aaron certainly right away remembered Brew Brothers Black Pilsner, and that was 25 years ago, somewhere in there.
That was one of the most interesting beers I saw come out of, well, as far as you can throw that like craft beer movement, like back, in that era, it was way more interesting than anything Big Rock was doing.
I think that's fair, yeah, and it was this weird little hybrid era post Big Rock's founding in the mid 80s and before Wild Rose got going. There was this little brewery that almost no one remembers called Brew Brothers that made this amazing black lager, and it's really nice to see someone in Calgary making a beer that's maybe not a deliberate tribute to it, but feels spiritually very much the same style. Yes, that's right. It was the Clairvoyant Yuzu IPA. Thank you, Justin. I forgot we did that. But yes, there was something in the back of my mind that said that we did that. And I think that Clairvoyant was maybe just a touch on the way out when we did it too. I think we had it a little too long when we finally tasted it. Spaceballs Schwarzbier. You know what? I'll be honest, I don't remember that one. I feel like Alley Cat had one that they call Black Cat. I'm trying to think what other like dark lagers. I mean, okay, let's dispense with the elephant in the room. Village, of course, has Blacksmith, which is very much in this style and is very, very good. But I feel like Alley Cat had one called Black Cat. I've seen other black lagers around, not just probably over there like screaming at me like, Kyle, you idiot, there's this black lager that everybody remembers that you're not like paying attention to. Apparently you can't think of one, so that's fair enough. And yeah, it's a very pretty, very refreshing style. And I'm glad that they called it an American black lager or just a black lager, because Schwarzbier is really tricky to sell. It's one thing that nobody really knows. I mean, I know that Schwarz means black, but that's not something a lot of people would, get right away. It's, I don't know, kind of a nice, easy drinking, darker style that doesn't leave you like super filled up. One of the things with that Cannery Darkling last week, it was so filling. Like it left you feeling so like warm and full and happy. And the alcohol wasn't really that high, but it was just so filling. I really like how smooth this is. It's an underappreciated style. I'm really glad Last Best did this. I just got an email, by the way, Last Best Tokyo, which is, I think after Super Saturation and Force Majeure, maybe the oldest New England IPA in Alberta, because it came out years and years, like 3.5 years ago. And of course, older than Blind Man, because that's the first one. It's a really, really good New England IPA, and I think we're going to get it here in the next couple of weeks, which I'm really looking forward to. See, and I'm really trying, Kevin, not to make a Spaceballs joke when I talk about Schwarzbier, but I'm glad you made it for us, so thank you.
I made it in the promo.
Did you make it in the promo?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Aaron. I didn't actually watch the promo this week because I was busy.
You missed out.
I missed out? Okay.
Yes. Did anyone watch the promo?
I'm sure
Does anyone watch the promos?
Does anyone watch the promos? Please tell Aaron you watch the promos.
I'm often proud of them. Occasionally proud of them.
You're occasionally proud of them?
Occasionally proud.
I'm never proud of my part. You do brilliant work. I'm just kind of there. I save my best work for the videos.
No.
All right, I think that's, ooh, yeah, I will say, I was going to say, I think that's enough for this, but on the finish, there's the hops. Like, I get some real, like, dank green hops as this kind of goes down. And then it sticks around. This doesn't finish kind of roasty and coffee-ish and chocolatey. This finishes really green, like celeriac and basil and green plants. This has some really interesting stuff right at the back that's just the hops. See, Craig Coburn watches the promos, and so does Deanne Robles. So you got at least two people watching. Actually, we can see the statistics on who watches the promos. So definitely people watch the promos, Aaron.
Yay.
Yay. Okay, that was fun.
Look at all this love.
See? Everybody likes Aaron. Not me, but everyone else likes Aaron. So let's jump right into the Annex Zeno Syne, which I just poured all over the floor. Someone else will clean that up later. So yeah, let's talk about this. So this is what they call a North American black ale. And that was kind of the impetus for me getting into this and talking about like American style dark beers, because they're so different from their like European counterparts. And I can see why they're calling this a North American dark ale. I got into this a little bit this afternoon with Rupert, actually. He is our new Annex beer salesperson. He dropped by today to tell us all about Zeno Syne, even though I already bought Zeno Syne. And he has some really cool stuff coming out. It is like a fodder-aged pineapple sour. I hope he gave me permission to talk about that. If not, I'm really sorry, Rupert. But yes, they do have some really neat stuff coming out in the next little while. But yes, they have the Zeno Syne. This is one of those beers that, what do we call this? There's black IPA. Well, the P stands for pale, so you have a Black India Pale Ale. Okay, well, if that doesn't work, let's try Cascadian Dark Ale. That just sounds stupid. North American Black Ale. Well, I do kind of get that it's going for the black IPA style, but maybe it's not as hoppy, or maybe they don't like either of those other two terms because they're both not great. I kind of like the term North American Black Ale, and it also gave me this impetus to taste these particular styles of beer because they're really different. If we had this against a German-style Schwarzbier, we wouldn't get that cool green hoppy thing at the back as much, and we would get more smoke. Whereas if we were doing the Stout and Porter, let's say against like Samuel Smith's, which is kind of the reference with Samuel Smith's Oatmeal Stout and Samuel Smith's Tatty Porter, they would seem very pale and very light and much drier than these are going to come off. So they're very different, and this was actually the beer that kind of sparked the idea for tonight. So thank you, Annex, for giving me good ideas and interesting beer. 5 minutes later, I broke my hand again, slipping on the floor. Let's hope not, Eric, but that is really just our style for these things. So just going to take a step this way away from the drip. But yes. So, call it what you will. Cascadian Dark Ale, Black IPA, what have you. This is a style that came out of Vermont originally. Now, I did actually a lot of Googling about the history of Black IPA, and it seems to be a really good idea that a lot of people had about the same time. Now, let's take one step back. Again, historical styles versus modern styles, there's really no crossover. Were beers that were brewed for Indian soldiers in India hopped really heavily so they could survive the transatlantic trip from the UK to India? Sure. Great. Fine. Fun historical fact. Has absolutely nothing to do with a modern, even a modern West Coast IPA, let alone an East Coast IPA. They have nothing to do with it. All of the hops would have been added at the beginning purely for bitterness and preservative effect. There would have been no like light, delicate, pretty hoppy citrus notes. They would have been wildly different. Ditto with, hoppy black beers pre-Black IPA. Of course, also coming out of the British Empire, we have Russian Imperial Stout, which was not brewed in Russia. It was brewed in the UK, hopped very heavily so it would survive the trip from the UK across, the Baltic Sea into Russia to be served to the Imperial Court. Those were hopped really heavily. If you had a young Russian Imperial Stout, which most people wouldn't because you wouldn't want to drink them that way, yes, it would have been very hoppy. But the idea of drinking those beers fresh and enjoying that hoppy flavor is a very new idea. I mean, by the time these beers got to Russia or India or wherever they were going, that fresh, hoppy, beautiful citrus character, it would all be gone. You'd just be very bitter. Not that there's anything wrong with Russian Imperial Stouts. Really old, mildly salty, shipped through the tropics in an un-air-conditioned wooden boat. Probably less so. But yeah, no. Let's talk about hoppy dark beers in a modern perspective. Our story takes us to Vermont, specifically Burlington, Vermont, with the Greg Noonan's Vermont Brewing Company, where he created, I forget what he called it, but it was the very first kind of acknowledged black IPA. It was very much in what we have in our glasses. It was a dark ale, lots of roasty character, and then the hops, rather than being kind of in the background as they are here with that kind of grassy, lightly vegetal character, they're right on top. It's all explosive, pretty hop aromatics with a roasty base. Now, I want to be really clear about this up front. I don't like black IPAs. I like this beer. This has been actually kind of a running joke the last week while we've been selling this, is it's the only black IPA I've ever liked. That's not entirely true. It's one of like 3 or 4 black IPAs I've ever liked. Another fun fact, for those of you who've been watching these for a while, I often make fun of the Phillips Skookum Cascadian Dark Ale because I hated it so much. That was actually, apparently, according to everything I read, the very first Canadian black IPA. I'm amazed we made a second one after that. But yeah, okay, black IPA, beer I don't usually like. Are the black wheat beers from Germany? I'm just going to answer a couple questions before we talk about the tasting notes on this. Not black, but Dunkelweizen or dark wheat is very, very common. Those differentiate from Munich Dunkel in the sense that they are actually usually done using ale yeast rather than lager yeast. So yes, a dark wheat beer from Germany is different from any other Dunkel in the sense that it uses ale yeast, so you get kind of those clove and root beer and banana characters. See, Chad, you and I are kindred spirit. We both dumped our beer on the floor. You know, you're not going to have Mike Malloy yell at you like I will, but, you know, your mileage may vary. Snake Lake Imperial Stout was a nice palate cleanser from the weird latchy thing. I liked Icebreaker. I don't often like those pastry stouts, those very, very sweet kind of vanilla chocolate caramel stouts. We're not going to make fun of all the things yet. We'll get to that. But no, I don't always like those sweeter stouts. But I do understand that there's actually a real art to making them and making them so that they come off as what they're supposed to taste like. Because I've had some bad ones. There's a brewery, I think I talked about it when we were doing maybe all the week where we did all the things, called Southern Tier out in New York, where they do those big sticky creme brulee, creme caramel, Irish coffee sort of stouts. And they tend to be very, very sweet. And I got really tired of them really fast, but I can appreciate the workmanship and the effort that goes into them. So, here we go. Yep, it smells like hops. And this is... I really didn't want to turn this into the video where Kyle talks about why he hates black IPA, but let's just make it that now. There's some really pretty things going on here. What do they say they use for hops in this? Do they say? Not right away. There's some really pretty interesting things happening here. You've got some tropical fruit. You've got some citrus. You've got some pine. But it's all kind of coming off soapy because it's mixing with those roasty characters in the malt. And I like the roasty character, but the chocolate and the coffee and everything else, they're being pushed down by the hops and coming off soapy. And there are clearly some really interesting, nice things happening with the hops, but I can't smell them because they're mixing with that muted roasty character and it's again coming off soapy to me. I don't know, maybe I just like my dark beers and my hoppy beers separately, but this is a really great example of a black IPA for me, one that I even actually kind of like, and it's still like, I could have 2 cans of this, but I'd rather have a can of an IPA and a can of a stout. I don't know. This is as good as I think anyone can do it, and it's still not my cup of tea. Thank you, Sean. And yes, I agree. Black IPA seems to be just... There was a hot minute there a couple of years ago where black IPA seemed to be the next big thing and everyone decided to brew one, despite the fact they seem to be really tricky to brew well. I've never made one for obvious reasons. They seem like they're not an easy thing to make and an even harder thing to make like very well. And for a while there, everybody seemed to feel this need to make a black IPA. And even Blind Man's, I had Blind Man's. I think they called like the Hudson Heart. Even that, I really didn't get. It just didn't do anything for me. Yeah, it seems to be one of those styles that's very hard to brew well. And for a while there, everyone and their mum seemed dead set on making one, and it just didn't turn out. Okay, and maybe this is, and this is something that I've been thinking about. Chad nails it right on the head, and this was actually about the next point I was going to make. Some people, including my wife, they can't taste cilantro. Cilantro just tastes soapy to them. Maybe there's a similar thing happening with black IPA. Maybe I'm just, genetically inferior. I don't have the ability to taste that. But yeah, they don't do anything for me. And now I have to finish this because again, Mike's going to kill me if I pour it in the garbage can again. See, and that's just it, Jeremy. Thank you. Jeremy says, I love hops, so the hops dominate this for me too much. I kind of wish there was maybe a little more of that like tropical fruity hop on top, because I kind of like, dark chocolate with like mangoes or with pineapples. I think they actually work quite well together. I kind of wish that there was more of that pretty delicate aromatic hop on top to accent the chocolate and the beer. But to me, it all comes off so soapy. I am being gently pushed into understanding black IPAs might just be a me thing by the comments. Like the fact that people who tune in every week and whose palates I respect, like Craig and Eric and Chad a little bit. No, like Chad, not a little bit. Chad's actually perhaps the most knowledgeable person who watches this. Certainly more knowledgeable than me. Really, he should be hosting this. Anyway, but yes, I don't know. It's not my thing. And I really wish I understood these better. Cherries? No, to me it's just soap. And the more I drink it, the more it tastes like sucking down a big glass of zest juice. Like the bar soap, not like citrus zest. I regret pouring this tall a glass. Okay, so setting that aside for now, I hope that I do want to say, I hope I didn't sour anyone else's enjoyment of that by my own bias. I hope that was very clear up front that this is a style I don't like, and if you did, great. I'm really happy for you. I hope that someday I will get to that point where I enjoy this as much as you do. I just don't. Stout and porter. Porter and stout in the order we're actually going to taste these. The older style is porter, coming out of the UK, out of kind of the mid-1700s. This was really the first of the British dark beers in the dark beer tradition. Stout at the time, one of its meanings was strong, so strong porter was called stout porter. Actually, the original name for Guinness's Extra Special Stout was actually Guinness's Extra Special Strong Porter. So, yeah, Stout's just a stronger version of porter. I'm not going to get into all the history. We did cover this last week, actually. But let's get into Fat Sherpa. Now, this is the winter seasonal from Establishment. We had it last winter. We'll have it all of this winter, as long as they have inventory. And this is a very classic North American style porter. Alcohol is 5.8, so exactly what I was saying before. I think that the Sam Smith's Taddy Porter is 4.6 or 4.7 in alcohol. This at 5.8 is a little bit stronger. I get the immediate chocolate and roast and caramel. Also, we get something kind of peanut buttery off this that I'm really grooving on. You had me at pine tar. Well, everything's better than all the things. Bud Light's better than all the things. At least it doesn't taste like anything. It just doesn't taste like nightmares. Now, the thing about Fat Sherpa that I really like is how subtle it is. This isn't loud. This isn't screaming, hey, here's coffee, hey, here's chocolate, hey, here's vanilla, hey, here's a giant bourbon barrel aging program. It's just wonderfully quiet and contemplative and just gentle. I really enjoy just how this isn't a beer that comes to you. It's not like an IPA where it's shouting out of the glass with aromatics, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me, look how amazing I am. It's quieter, and it asks you to come to it, and it invites you to find out more about it, and I really like this about this style. Again, on a running theme of apparently establishment doesn't make a bad beer, but someday they might, and we'll call them out on it. Actually, I shouldn't say it. This is a really interesting story. Establishment a while back made a triple. It was a Belgian triple that, they talked about to me for a couple of weeks before I was supposed to come pick it up. And then I was, in town, ready to pick up beers from establishment. They're like, oh yeah, you can't pick that up. I said, well, did you sell it all? They're like, no. We're just not going to release it. We already canned it. It's in cans. It's ready for sale. We're just not going to sell it to you because it's not good enough. So, establishment does make bad beer. Occasionally, it happens. But they won't sell it, which is kind of amazing. I do see around the brewery occasionally, like, empty flats of this stuff. I still have yet to talk them out of giving me a can. But, yeah, no, they do make occasionally a beer that doesn't work. And it gets all the way to the canning phase, but they pulled it at the last minute and said, no, this doesn't cut the mustard. So I really respect that, and I really hope someday I get to try the only establishment bad beer that ever got canned, because that'd be fun, just for laughs. Probably won't finish it, but it'd be interesting to try. See, Terry is also correct. All aboard the soapy train with Black IPA. And again, this is where I come in with the Zeno Syne. I don't like Black IPA at all, but I quite liked this. Was it still soapy to me? Yes. Should I have poured myself less? Definitely yes. It was still a really nice beer. It's just really not for me. Now, Sean, this is an interesting point. I don't ever look up what beers win medals because everybody has won something. And, if you and I wanted to have like our own, beer and wine judging ceremony, we could do it in my garage and call it, the Fitzpatrick Memorial Wine Championship. Even though you're not dead. And, we could create these really fancy labels and send out, like, neck tags to wineries and say, you won the Fitzpatrick Prize, sorry. It's been a long day. And we could, stick them on all these wine bottles, and everybody would pretend it was this super prestigious thing. It got 99 points, and it won this fancy trophy. It's all nonsense. Every last wine rating, every last beer rating, every last whiskey rating, it's all foolishness. There are a few writers that really do care and contribute, but by and large, I'll give the giant exception to Jancis Robinson, who does amazing work, but I also don't think she actually does like wine rating on a numeric scale. By and large, anyone who gives you like a out of 100 or out of 10 or out of 5 score, it's all nonsense. So this won a gold medal. Great. This is our super duper extra special Andrew Hilton Beer of the Year. It means about as much, which is to say it doesn't mean anything at all. I find numeric scores and awards like that just utterly meaningless. Does establishment have a good brewmaster? Absolutely not. They have an amazing brewmaster who is someone that I deeply respect and whose work I really, really enjoy. Eric, I realize that I can just do this easily by talking inanely at a camera, and you actually have to type it all out. But I'd be really curious to get a couple of your insights about the behind-the-scenes stuff at establishment, because that'd be really interesting. Bad pairing with pizza. Well, yeah, you're right. It would be a bad pairing with pizza, quite honestly. That would not work at all. See, Sean, you and I are two people of the very much the same heart. The kids are in bed, and I actually have time to read a book. Beer. I love just sitting down and reading a book and have something like this that's kind of heavy and relaxing and not just in my face. I enjoy an IPA, but I like an IPA when I go out with friends and we're going to have hot wings and watch a hockey game. You know, before COVID, when that was a thing you could do with friends. I like IPA socially, but, you know, if I'm just hanging out kind of by myself, you know, listening to music and reading a book, this is very much the style of beer I reach for. You're very correct. Okay, so let's quickly do our shameless promotion segment about what we have coming up, because we actually have some pretty incredible stuff coming up. Let's start with this Friday night, just 48 hours from now. By popular demand, I did finally find an Oloroso sherry, so we can do our promised sherry tasting. So, sherry, of course, comes from Spain. A lot of people... Wow, that came from a deep place. A lot of people think sherry is a dessert wine, that sherry always has to be sweet. Nothing could be further from the truth. None of the wines we're actually going to taste on Friday night really have any residual sweetness at all. The Amontillado has a bit, but it has about as much sugar as the porter we just had. Like, it's dry. Now, the idea of sherry being sweet is very much tied to the commercialization of sherry and, at least to people who care about wine, the ruining of sherry for about 40 years. We're going to taste some really interesting stuff. Now, I know we have some Scotch drinkers and some Scotch fans who kind of know what things are priced at. Craig. This Marques de Poli, this is a 35-year Amontillado. So they line up 35 barrels in a row, end to end. And when they want to make this, they take half of the barrel out of the very last one, and then they fill it forward. So half out of the next, half out of the next, half out of the next, all the way down 35 in a row. And finally, at the very first barrel on the line, they top it up with brand new wine. Now, that's at least 35 years old, but this Solera was started in 1922. So some of the wine, granted, a tiny, infinitesimally small amount, is still from 1922. So it's a minimum 35, but it's a whole lot, and that's $39.95 or $38.95 on the shelf for a bottle. Where a 35-year-old Scotch, if you can get in and out under $500-600, you're doing really well. So that's kind of this insane value we're working with. So we have like a 35-year-old sherry, we have a 15-year-old sherry, and then we have a very young sherry, but that's by design. Fino is supposed to be drank fairly young. This is just going to be really fun. It's going to be really oxidative because all of these styles depend on aging in the presence of oxygen to become what they are. It's just going to be one of the more interesting ones we've ever done. It's going to be super wine nerdy. It's going to be super offbeat. I'm really looking forward to it. Now, next week, you asked for it. You all asked for this IPA retrospective. Let's get back to the 90s. Let's talk about the history of IPA sort of experience. And I said, okay, let's do that. Now, I did promise we would try to do Tree Hophead, and we definitely tried. Fun story, I actually tried to order Tree Hophead for this to be our fourth beer instead of Red Racer from Connect. Couldn't do it. It's not at Connect. It's apparently now brewed at Big Rock. At some point in the last few years, Big Rock bought Tree, and now Tree is brewed at Big Rock. Big Rock Ordered S didn't have Tree. Connect didn't have Tree. I don't know if Hophead's even still made, because I could not find it anywhere from like the people who own it or the people who formerly supplied it. It's just not around. So fine. We will talk about the fact that tree hophead was a thing that we, used to enjoy until Red Racer came along and just absolutely took over the IPA market. So this is our love affair with West Coast IPA. Everything old is new again. Let's talk about the history of West Coast IPA. I'm just calling it West Coast, Best Coast. So we're going to talk about like Red Racer, Fat Tug. These are kind of our historical examples, and then we'll get into some brand new ones with Reinhardt's Armed in Citra and the Cabin Season Pass. So we're going to explore about 25 years of IPAs in Alberta and talk about how things went, where it came from. And as an IPA lover who owned a liquor store, where I kind of saw things like, maybe some people will still remember when Cassandra worked here like a million years ago. She was mailing me bombers of Fat Tug from BC because I loved it so much after she moved to Vancouver. Like, IPA in Alberta used to be tricky to get. And we're going to talk about all of that and a little bit else and just get ourselves back to the roots of IPA with our West Coast, Best Coast tasting. So that's coming up Wednesday next week. Finally, next Friday, so 10-ish days away, we're going to go back to a Scotch tasting. Now, this one I'm really proud of, mostly because I browbeat Brad Sharp till he gave me a really good price on this. This is going to be our Brooklady tasting. Now, the Brooklady tasting, the base tasting is going to be this kit. And this kit, these normally cost me, as like a guy who owns a liquor store, like $73. But they gave me a really sweet deal on these, so I'm going to sell these for $80, including tax. The $73 definitely does not. And you get a 200 ml each of the Isla Beer and Organic Barley. And we're going to do these for $80 all in. And we're going to have the Canadian, either the Canadian or North American brand ambassador for Brooklady join us to actually walk us through all three of these. And then in addition, if you want to buy them, they will also walk us through the Brooklady Laddie Classic and the Port Charlotte 2012 Isla Barley, which will be available at heavily discounted prices. So that is our upcoming Scotch tasting. And of course, Aaron will have a much too well edited video that I don't really deserve to do that. So, Scotty, you don't like Fat Tug. That's fair. I get it. Well, no, I don't get it at all, but I will pretend I get it because you're a regular viewer. Jeremy, if you love sherry and you're a granny, I'm also a granny. I'm totally fine with that. It is a shame about Hophead because it was so neat, and I can remember, and this would be really early on, I would have been 20 or 21, so that's 15 years ago. I can remember doing a beer tasting on the patio at Mocha Cabana, and like Tree was just launching like Hophead and Cutthroat Pale Ale and Thirsty Beaver Amber Ale, and I think this is even before like Mellow Moon Pineapple Heffa, which I don't think they make anymore. I think that's even like hit the dustbin of history. And I can remember like giving out these like really awful plastic Tree Brewing keychains that were bottle openers that would snap the second you tried to open a bottle with them. Because Tree had these really weird proprietary bottles that weren't screw caps, so they gave away bottle openers so you could open them. Which seems kind of stupid. Why pay for that? Why not just put screw caps on your bottles? Regardless. Yeah, it was an interesting time. I really miss Tree and those early days of kind of IPA in Alberta and being at the very bleeding edge of the first wave of craft beer in Alberta, which included things like Tree Hophead and Wild Rose and Alley Cat and Cannery, which we actually tasted last week. Way to stay super relevant, Cannery. Like, you were there back in like the Tree and Wild Rose days, and you're still hanging about such that you're making beer interesting enough we're still tasting it like 15, 18 years later. That's kind of amazing. Sean, I feel like you're a little bit trolling me and wanting to drag me into the Red Racer versus Racer 5 lawsuit, which we will absolutely be talking about next week, but I'm not going to get into today because, you know, that's basically the story I had prepped for next week when I was talking about Red Racer, so I'm not going to get into it now. Will Lee Hansen's kitchen ambient audio be featured in the Scotch tasting? I've been making fun of Lee pretty much nonstop by text since that happened. Yeah, no. Lee will be, if we ever have Lee again, and we almost certainly will, Lee will be like locked in his bedroom closet with his laptop and a whiskey glass and not allowed to like have anyone around because he clearly cannot control his audio situation. Any plans for a port tasting? Not as such. And the reason for that is purely like monetary. I can do like this crazy 15-year, 35-year sherry tasting. A bottle of the 40-year-old Taylor Fladgates at my cost is $130. I feel like that would be a tough sell for a tasting like this. So no, I can't really do that. Port's just spendy. For whatever reason, despite the fact the sherry industry is really, really depressed and prices are really great, it never really happened to port. So at some point we might do a port tasting, but it could never be the quality and the equal of the sherry event just because it would have to be so much lesser wines for the same money. Oh well, we have so many comments to get through. That's wonderful, by the way. Please keep them coming. And Kevin, you're right. Season Pass is amazing. We have lots of the beer tasting for next week. Our limiting factor is Season Pass, but we still have another flat of Season Pass after we sell the tasting, so we should not run out. Yeah, there was Sean. There was a whole big thing about the word racer between Bear Republic Racer 5 and the Red Racer IPA from Central City. I don't know what the actual result was, but I do have it in my notes for next week to find out how that lawsuit went before I go on camera. So if I don't know next week, feel free to make fun of me. I also remember a day when there was Racer 5 and Hop Rod, and I feel like Big Bear Stout came on that. And yeah, this was before they changed the laws in Alberta to allow breweries the size of Blind Man and, you know, everything we have on the table here to actually exist. I can remember where everything interesting we got in Alberta, it came from California or Montana or somewhere else. I think this is a much healthier situation. All right, let's get on to our Dandy in the Underworld Oyster Stout. Now, Dandy and I have a little bit of a complex relationship. I absolutely love Dandy. It just doesn't sell well enough. I think Dandy is one of the most talented breweries in Alberta. They are, I would say, almost the equal of Blind Man, but when I bring in inventory, when it sits on the shelf, it's a much slower seller, and I don't know why. It's not a quality thing, I don't think. I don't know if it's a packaging or a marketing or it's a brand image thing, but Dandy just sits, and I don't really know why, which is a shame because their beers are excellent. Dandy, of course, is also in Calgary. In terms of breweries, they are probably the closest to 88, just off of, I think that's Ogden Road right there. So really excellent beers. They don't really do an IPA per se. Most of their stuff is a little bit more malty, a little more rich, a little more Belgian inspired, at least early on. Oyster Stouts are a very old British style, and I do want to just kind of take a bit of an aside here to talk about different styles of stout. So this is an Oyster Stout in an American style. Traditional English Stout, as we discussed, a little less sugar, a little less alcohol, a little bit drier. And then we have the Irish Stout style where they would actually deliberately sour, historically all of the beer would be lightly sour, but even to this day with Guinness, they actually sour about 3% of the beer deliberately to blend back into the beer to give it that distinct drying tang. Oyster Stout, Chocolate Stout, Imperial Stout, Russian Imperial Stout, Coffee Stouts. I mean, Stout's just a really nice base recipe for everything. Now, Oyster Stout follows on a very old Victorian tradition of adding a protein component to a stout, whether it be oysters or raw beef or what have you, to add kind of a savory umami character to it. Historically, they would actually add oysters, ground up and then boiled to be purified oysters to the beer. These days, it's just a beer to pair with oysters, and I've never really gotten that idea. Like, I love oysters, but I like oysters with like high acid white wine like Champagne or Sauvignon Blanc for New Zealand or Chablis. I don't think I'd ever really want like a big, sticky, sweet, dark beer with oysters. That seems really counterintuitive, but apparently it's a thing. Oysters or otherwise, though, that's a great stout. Like, it's big, it's mouth-filling, it's got nice sweetness, it's got a little bit of like pretty perfume and florals. That's just big and round and delightful. Eric, you make an excellent point. How did Dandy never become the Blind Man of Calgary? And I don't know. Dandy seems like this brewery whose brewing-wise they did everything right, and marketing-wise they somehow managed to do everything wrong, at least down here. Because you're right, Dandy's brewing quality, they should have been as big as Blind Man, perhaps even before Blind Man, because they got started right around the same time. And yeah, they just, at least outside of Calgary, they never really got established the way Blind Man did. Now, I will say, they made some deliberate choices to not, at least early on, do an IPA, to not do like a blonde ale that would be super accessible, but that shouldn't have made that big a difference. I mean, Blind Man's never made, other than like the Five of Diamonds Pilsner, which is an excellent Pilsner, that's like the most, generic beer they've ever made. And, they've always had an IPA with long shadows, and if you wanted to say that, Blind Man River Session is not that far off an IPA, sure, you're pretty correct. But, no, I don't know why Dandy never became like the Blind Man of Calgary, because they had every opportunity. Jeremy, mouth-filling is not a hashtag. It is hashtag mouthfeel, sir. No, they never tried to be big, which I really respect, but Blind Men have never really tried to be big either. They just wanted to make awesome beer and sell enough of it to pay their bills. They just got big. And in talking to Shane and Nick and everybody at Blind Men, like, they were wildly surprised by how big and how successful they became. There are certainly breweries that, shall remain nameless, Cooley Brewing, that exist to make money and get big and don't necessarily focus on the beer. And sometimes they succeed and sometimes they fail. By and large, most breweries aren't started out of a desire to make money. They're started out of a desire to make great beer and out of a vision that someone sees or has a passion for homebrewing and wants the world to taste what they can make and their own interpretations. Those are usually the breweries that succeed and get bigger than they intended. I can think of a couple of very cynical brewing operations that got big. Crooked Stave comes to mind, but by and large, most of the really great breweries out there were started by passionate, engaged, interested people who wanted to, make great beer. The money was secondary. If they paid their bills, they were thrilled. Yeah, I can't say, Dandy never wanted to make money, so they were separate. A lot of these folks, they just wanted to make beer and the money was secondary. And Dandy did start with the Bombers right at the era where Bombers kind of started dying off. That's certainly true. Eric, the season pass everyone is talking about is the West Coast IPA from Cabin for next week. It is in the tasting pack, but we also still have at least 2 or 3 4-packs left for sale. Have I done a beer tasting of Lethbridge Craft Breweries? I've not yet. I've been talking to Kelty about doing one. Darren from Spectrum apparently Daryl, pardon me, is selling enough beer that he doesn't have beer to spare for me, so I can't do one with him, even though actually like week 2 or week 3 of doing these, I actually went to Daryl and said, hey, let's do like this online collaboration tasting thing. And he said, Kyle, I don't have the beer to spare. I just don't. I'm too busy. So I'll go back and talk to Daryl a little later on. But yeah, I've talked to him. It would have to be a theoretically tasting at this point, and I have no issue with that. Just it would have to be a 1 brewery tasting. That's a fun story, Sean. Oh God, did we have a Dandy beer on the growler station before they started canning? Like, Dandy came down here like once, way early. I genuinely don't remember us having that on the growler station. That would have been still before we had even like the counter pressure filler probably. That would have been like when we had that awful, terrible fake brass draft head that we filled off using like PVC hoses. That was a bad time. We made it work for like a couple, 3 years, but that was a bad time. I don't pick up the salt. Chad, I don't get the salt at all. Okay, no, now that you say it, yeah, I really do. Okay, you're right. It's black chocolate, salt, and raspberries. That's a great call. And also mandarin oranges, oddly. All right, so we got super sidetracked, as we always do, but it was a lot of fun. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. This was wonderful. This was a great way to spend a Wednesday night. Thank you all for coming and hanging out and talking beer with me, and we covered a lot of really interesting points. Were any of them really relevant to the topic at hand? Probably not, but they were still fun, and I enjoyed every last bit of it. So thank you all so much. We will see you again next week for West Coast, Best Coast, and until then, I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton, and this has been a very random night, but one of my favorites. Good night, everyone.